Thank you so much. I want to just acknowledge my colleagues who are here. I'm Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky, and we have with us right now Congressman Lloyd Doggett, Congressman Earl Blumenauer, Congressman Adriano Espaillat, and I'm looking forward to also seeing Rosa DeLauro, and I believe Jesus Chuy Garcia is hopefully going to be with us as well. So we are talking about the TRIPS waiver. And I just want to say that all of us that are on this call right now, that are on this Zoom right now, have a very simple mission, and that is to save the world from the coronavirus. And we think that we know a path to do that. So we released a letter today that has the signature of over half of the Democratic caucus in the House of Representatives, 110 members, and separately, the Speaker of the House wrote to the President of the United States asking for support for what is called the TRIPS waiver at the World Trade Organization. There is a meeting tomorrow of the WTO. Our trade representative, Catherine Tai, will be there. And what we are hoping is that we will hear that the United States will in fact support the waiver. I do know that just a short while ago, the president was asked the question about whether or not the United States would support the waiver that would allow countries around the world to be able to provide the vaccines, that they would be able to make them. They could get the recipe and they could distribute them themselves. And his answer was, we will decide that as we go along. So we decided to take that as a positive, and hopefully the as we go along will mean that the United States will do just that. Not long ago, earlier this month, the World Health Organization said that there have been 1 billion doses distributed around the world, and 0.3 have gone to poor countries. So there are literally still many countries around the world that haven't even gotten a single dose. And the New York Times had on the cover on Sunday of the newspaper a map of the world showing where the virus is. And those of you who saw it know that South America was virtually looking like it was on fire, using that red color to indicate the presence of the virus. And what we also know, and even the pharmaceutical companies have agreed, that where the virus flourishes anywhere, human beings are at risk everywhere. And so our goal has been to support the well over 100 countries that have asked for this waiver, led by India and South Africa. And we are hoping that this is going to move quickly. I hope that as we go along is quick, because we are in a race against time. The variants develop, and all of the money that we have been spending to help the airline industry and the hospitality industry and to completely open our country, all of that could be for naught if we have another wave that is caused by the pandemic emerging again around the world. So that is our goal. And I'm going to, let's see if I have time. Yes, I'm going to next call on Earl Blumenauer to say his words. And if I have to leave because I have a doctor's appointment, I'm going to ask Lloyd Doggett to take over. But Earl, you're next.
Thank you. Thank you, Jen. And thank you for your leadership on this. It's been terrific working with you for the last couple of years as we try and deal with the pharmaceutical industry. You know, I will say if the pharmaceutical industry had spent as much time trying to boost production as they spent fighting this waiver and access for poor countries, we may not have even needed the waiver. This should not be adversarial. We have, as you know, invested as a country tremendous sums of money to help develop the vaccines. We ought to be able to get their full cooperation. As you say, and we must repeat, until we are out, until the world is fully vaccinated, the United States is not out of the pandemic. We are still at risk for reinfection, for further waves, and it is beyond comprehension that we're not doing everything we can to make sure that we break this vicious cycle of reinfections. I am excited that we will have Ambassador Chuy, with whom Rosa and Jan and I worked, Lloyd on the Ways and Means Committee. This was our trade counsel, and we know her well. And we hope that she will help us thread this needle, because there are ways to be able to satisfy legitimate needs of the pharmaceutical industry and yet help us save the world. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you, my colleagues, for being a part of this, and look forward to working with the administration to be successful in what we need to do to protect ourselves. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Earl. I do want to add that the major barrier standing in the way are the pharmaceutical companies, Big Pharma, who sent its letter to the president asserting that intellectual property rights were the most important thing. And I interpret that as profits over people. We are at a war right now. The enemy is the virus, and we are seeing war profiteering going on right now around the world. And so we do, as Earl has said, we need to make sure that the pharmaceutical companies are willing to share the recipe, are willing to help stand up the ability of countries around the world to produce their own vaccines and to deliver them. We have the capability of doing it, and we need to. And Big Pharma is really the roadblock. We are joined by Rosa DeLauro now, but I'm going to go by the people who have come, if you don't mind, Rosa. And Lloyd Doggett is next. And I'm going to head off to the doctor's office, but thank you all for coming, and the media people who are here as well. Thank you.
So Jan, I think you're calling on me or Rosa?
No, I'm calling on you, Lloyd.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. And as you leave, thank you for your invaluable leadership on this and your persistence. Like you, I just watched President Biden's press conference with his goal of immunizing 70% of Americans. Very, very hopeful. And yet, as I read yesterday's New York Times, the report that in India, 2% of the people have been fully vaccinated, and less than 1% in South America, low numbers across Latin America. While I applaud the president's very determined efforts, which have surely saved so many American lives, when he was asked about the TRIPS waiver, as Jan said, he indicated that he was still deciding on it. Our message today, quite simply, please, Mr. President, stop deciding and start acting. Even tomorrow, the administration can act. Fight this pandemic by expanding global vaccine manufacturing capacity. While the discussions that the group of us today and a few of our colleagues in addition with U.S. Trade Ambassador Catherine Tai, who's doing an outstanding job, and White House COVID-19 czar Jeff Zients last week, were very constructive. They have yet to produce visible action. Yes, all of them inherited a true disaster with Trump's xenophobia and incompetence. What if Trump hadn't stood in the way? Well, more Americans would be alive today because more vaccine could have been manufactured in America under license by sharing the vaccine recipes so that we got the vaccine sooner. And very importantly, manufacturing in India and elsewhere would have prevented many more in the developing world to be already immunized because more vaccine would have been made available. We know this can be done. In fact, it's been done without the waiver when Pfizer previously licensed its vaccine recipe, which it gave to another pharmaceutical company, Sanofi, to manufacture 125 million doses for the European Union. If Big Pharma and Trump hadn't colluded, lives could have already been saved around the world. Instead, as with every other aspect of the failed response to the pandemic, Americans have been severely endangered by Trump, but they will also be endangered by the Biden administration if it fails to act promptly to correct the worldwide vaccine shortage, a shortage that is enabling this highly contagious, rampant pandemic to spread a path of death and suffering throughout the world as we see dangerous mutating new variants. Variants which could head right back to our shores and unwind the hard-won progress of the Biden administration over the last 100 days. This persistent global danger requires global solutions. The horror that we see played out day after day in India with the spread of these dangerous variants could play out again and again in one country after another if we don't act immediately. Blocking access to vaccines is anti-humanitarian, it's anti-diplomatic, and it weakens American influence for the good on the global stage. It's particularly important to recognize that it's American taxpayers who've invested more than $20 billion in vaccine research, development, manufacturing, and distribution. We as taxpayers are entitled to a say in how these vaccines are used. Just this morning, Pfizer's first quarter earnings revealed $3.5 billion in revenue and an estimated $900 million in profits this first quarter, just from one vaccine in a profit-sharing agreement with BioNTech using taxpayer-funded mRNA technology developed and patented by the National Institutes of Health. Joining with us, taxpayers around the globe have financed COVID vaccines, yet their investments have not been protected. Manufacturers have been given exclusive rights over these taxpayer-financed vaccines, and we taxpayers must now prevent that exclusivity from blocking access when so many millions of lives are at stake. Now, one of the leaders for us on healthcare generally and on this issue in specific, our friend Rosa DeLauro. Rosa?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Congressman Doggett, and to you as well, Congressman Blumenauer. I want to just, I'm so proud to join with you today, and I want to thank Congresswoman Schakowsky and again, Congressman Doggett, Congressman Blumenauer, Congressman Espaillat for your commitment to crushing this coronavirus within their states and around the world. And to Jan Schakowsky, which we all want to mention is the host of today's press conference, and Earl, both of them have fought so tirelessly on issues related to the access to medicines. I was proud to work hand in hand with them on the USMCA to ensure any renegotiated NAFTA did not include monopoly rights for pharmaceutical companies. That is what we fought for. We were successful in that fight. So now we come together with my colleagues and again, proud to join them on this critical issue. And today, as we have for weeks now, we urge the president to reverse the damage done by the Trump administration, to reestablish this country's global reputation, restore America's public health leadership by announcing support for the waiver that was proposed by India and South Africa at the World Trade Organization. We sent a letter to ask the administration to support this effort at the WTO. The letter was signed by 109 members of the caucus, demonstrating the broad base of support for this effort. And we see every single day, this pandemic knows no borders. And the critical importance of US leadership cooperating with global partners in curtailing this virus could not be more important. The waiver that has been proposed by India and South Africa at the WTO would, as it's been pointed out, temporarily lift intellectual property barriers, allow countries to locally manufacture COVID-19 diagnostics, treatments, and vaccines, and increasing the timely access, especially in developing countries. Why is it that we want to get everyone vaccinated here and taking care of everyone here, and it's about 90% here that we're looking for, and we're willing to say it's only 20 to 30% of developing countries that should be protected, and the variants which show more resistance to vaccines prove that further delay in immunity around the world will lead to faster and stronger mutations, and making equitable access to vaccinations essential. If you have an equation that on one side is saving lives and the other is protecting intellectual property, you tell me where the decision ought to fall. Let's talk about the licensing. Let's talk about those recipes. Let's talk about what people need to know. That is what is at stake here. It's not just such an intellectual construct. It is of moral importance. And the morality of this speaks loud and clear. Our globalized system cannot recover if only parts of the world are vaccinated and have protection against the virus. We need to make the vaccine available everywhere if we are going to crush this virus anywhere. And we need to make the public policy choices, both in the US and at the WTO, that puts patients first. Expanding, as has been pointed out, vaccine access to developing nations is not only economically effective and essential to our national security. As I said, it is a moral responsibility. And while I support the Biden administration's announcement that we are going to share millions of doses of AstraZeneca, that is not enough. That is not enough. Look at the apocalyptic images coming out of New Delhi. We've seen a family surrounding their mother, trying to administer chest compressions to her motionless body. Indian doctors and nurses desperately trying to save the lives of patients who are gasping for air in a crowded hospital that ran out of oxygen. A woman 7 months pregnant, running from hospital to hospital, trying to find help for her husband, whose lungs were already 80% infected. Overrun crematorium, sending grieving families away with nowhere to take the bodies of their loved ones. That is the reality. And the TRIPS waiver is key to the end of the pandemic and the beginning of a strong global recovery. We, the most powerful nation in the world, that can help to bring an end to this catastrophe. We cannot sit idly by, constrained by big pharma, because that is where the problem exists, watching millions of people die. So I'm proud to join my colleagues, and I see Congressman Garcia as well, who is now on the call. We have banded together, and we will continue to bring the force of the members of Congress and advocates to the administration that says, please let these countries have the ability to develop the vaccines to save their people and to save, yes, the United States. And with that, I yield back. I'm yielding back to you, Lloyd.
Yes, Rosa, and thank you so much for your passion as usual. Certainly one of the truly eloquent voices also on this issue is our colleague from New York, Adriano Espaillat. Would you add your words?
Thank you, Lloyd. Thank you, Rosa, Earl, Chuy, and of course, Jan, for her leadership on this issue. This is a pandemic, and the word speaks volume. It's global in scope. It's not just the United States or even this hemisphere. As we see now, the pandemic really on fire in India and in Latin America, South America, and the Caribbean. We see the impact that it has globally, and we will not be safe unless the entire planet is vaccinated. Many countries, Lloyd, many countries have entered agreements with the pharmaceuticals way back, perhaps even at the beginning of the pandemic, but they've been pushed to the back of the line. They have not gotten the supplies. They have not gotten the vaccines. So even those that had entered agreements with the pharmaceuticals were pushed to the back of the line and have not been able to vaccinate their people. And so we in the United States and the European Union muscled our way in to get the bulk of the vaccine. And so these people have been left behind and they're dying. And unless we vaccinate the world, none of us will be safe here in America or anywhere else. So this waiver is critical. 50 countries have already supported the waiver. 9 senators and over 100 members of Congress are supportive of it. And we cannot have intellectual property be a priority over people's rights and people's lives. We cannot have the same argument that we hear from Big Pharma that it will hamper innovation as a pretext and an excuse that will lead to the hundreds of thousands of deaths across the world. So this is an important initiative. I must say that there's a new term out there which is called vaccine diplomacy. We are failing dramatically as a nation in our vaccine diplomacy because we are not proposing this waiver the way we should be to allow people to produce in countries that would otherwise may face a long period of time without vaccination. They're predicted, many countries are predicted that unless this happens, they won't be able to vaccinate their people until 2024 or 25. So this is a critical health issue for the planet, for the globe, and we must push forward with it. So thank you for this opportunity, Lloyd. And we must continue to push ahead and get the Biden administration to come on board with this as quickly as possible.
And thank you so much for your commitment and your words. Certainly one of the strongest advocates in our meeting last week with the White House was Representative Chuy Garcia from Chicago. Chuy, would you add a few words to this and then we'll call for some questions?
Yes, thank you, Lloyd, and to all of my colleagues, of course, Jen Schakowsky, Representative DeLauro, Doggett, and Blumenauer, and Espaillat. So last Friday, we met with the White House and the U.S. Trade Representative, and we urged them to support the TRIPS waiver and help the world access the COVID-19 vaccines. This is both a moral and a health issue, and I'm very glad to be associated with my colleagues embracing this most just cause. Friday's meeting was a constructive start, but we need action now. COVID-19 does not respect borders, and no one is safe from this virus while billions of people have no access to vaccines. Whether it's Mexico, India, or Nigeria, they can't protect their people, then that's just not an international problem. It's a problem for millions of immigrant families like mine throughout this country. So it's time for the White House to put human lives before pharmaceutical company profits. our government invested in the research and development of this vaccine. This is the time to share it with everyone across the world. So it's time to fully support the TRIPS waiver and allow for more vaccine production. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we're open to all of us to any questions that any members of the press may have. Are there any?
Members of the press, I just enabled your mute. You're not able to unmute yourselves. So I think Emily and then Andrea. Emily, if you can go ahead.
Hi, Emily. Thank you.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. I was just hoping you could respond to Anthony Fauci's recent comments on this issue. He was basically concerned that court proceedings, legal concerns could hold up any technology transfer for so long that this would be not particularly meaningful. I guess I'm just wondering what your take is on that.
Well, I know the National Institutes of Health as a whole has always been very sensitive because of its working relationship with the pharmaceutical industry. It's entirely within the power of that big pharma group to decide to not pursue this on legal challenges. And there's certainly nothing to prevent other ongoing efforts, the modest efforts to get additional vaccines exported from here. But I don't see how our acting on the TRIPS waiver would in any way impede the flow of vaccine elsewhere. And unless we increase global manufacturing capacity, I don't believe that we can meet global demand. We're clearly meeting an infinitesimal portion of that demand at present. Would any other member like to add on Emily's question?
Maybe, Lloyd, if I could just elaborate
Sure.
briefly. There are so many points of interaction between the federal government and the pharmaceutical industry. Along the way, we've talked about how the development of the vaccine was cooperative, and we made substantial investments that made their vaccines possible. I think that there's no reason that we can't reach an accord that is mutually beneficial. They don't have to be have a dog in the manger attitude. It's to their advantage to be able to work with us in a cooperative basis. And the more international vaccines there are, they're in the long run, they're going to make all the money that they would anyway. And they can do so with a clear conscience and being able to help promote global health. That ought to be the objection. And I think there are enough contact points here that we can work this out and thread the needle without trampling on anybody's intellectual property or the notion that somehow they will be denied a fair profit.
Next.
Hi, this is Andrea Shalal with Reuters. Thanks for taking my question. I just wanted to ask you what you think where is the resistance? There's some suggestion that there's conflict within the Biden administration on this. Do you see any signs that it could be changing or moving towards something positive? And what role would it play if the terms of the TRIPS waiver as proposed by India and South Africa are narrowed somewhat? Would that make a big difference? Do you think that would help?
Earl, would you like to respond on that? We know that we'll get an indication of how successful this is tomorrow at the WTO.
Yes, I am absolutely convinced that there are ways. We had hints of this when we had our meeting with Jeff Seitz and Catherine Tai last week that Chuy referenced. They are looking for paths forward. And I think some modest adjustments can maybe, I think part of it is giving them a sense that they have been heard, they're not being trampled on, but making some modest adjustments. I think we can get the substance of what we want with the waiver and being able to get the production and being able to get them to work with other countries because it's not just a case of giving them a formula. They really need to work to be able to make it possible. And I hope that they're willing to do that and that the administration stands firm.
Lloyd,
Yes,
just
President.
for 1 second, this morning
Sure.
I had the opportunity, because she was in Connecticut, to speak with Secretary Raimondo and in Commerce. I asked her about this and told her I would also follow up with a call, and that she said that they are working on it. So I think there are some positive signs. We need to continue to make the case, as my colleagues are doing that today, and see what those adjustments are. But I think with the continued pressure on this, not just from members of Congress, but from the advocates as well, I think can move us to a positive outcome, because at the base of it, it is a humanitarian crisis and an issue, and that is what ought to take precedence. And I believe that we have an administration that does take into consideration the humanitarian initiatives. I think that's where their heart lies, and we want to try to make it easy for them in any way that we can, through looking at what the legal remedies or some of these other efforts are, which is what my colleagues and myself are trying to do. And with that, Lloyd, I have to get on another Zoom call, but thank you very, very much. Thank you.
Appropriate for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, who's next?
Daniel Marins from Huffington Post.
Sure, Daniel.
Hey, everybody. I guess I was curious if you have any pushback to the argument that's been made by the pharmaceutical industry and really reiterated, even by many of your Democratic colleagues, that that because of the lack of sort of infrastructure and capacity of many of these developing nations, that somehow lifting this waiver wouldn't actually provide relief. And a second part to that question is, I wonder if you have thoughts on why many of your colleagues in the House Democratic Caucus and including in the Congressional Progressive Caucus were unwilling to get on the letter. So yeah, it's a two-parter.
I'll respond, and then perhaps Chuy, you may want to add something here. I think it's impressive that we have a majority of the Democratic caucus on this letter. And as far as the ability to produce, yes, certainly Chad, Paraguay are not going to be centers of manufacturing. But Mexico has an advanced generic manufacturing capability. India produces many of the generic products that we use every day in the United States. There is manufacturing capacity elsewhere. Yes, it will take some time to gear up for that manufacturing capacity. That's why it's so tragic that the Trump administration colluded with the pharmaceutical industry for so long to do so little in the way of protecting the public here or elsewhere. But I think it is clearly a step we need when you see only 1 or 2% of people immunized in these countries to get that process underway. That's why we feel it's so urgent. It will take some time once the waiver occurs to get the manufacturing process going, but the time to begin that is now. Chuy, do you or another colleague want to add something?
Lloyd, go ahead, Chuy.
I'm sorry, is that Adriano?
Yeah.
Sure, go right ahead.
Okay, now I know that the pharmaceutical world is all over the different regions of the planet, and the countries do have the know-how and the infrastructure to produce. It may take some time, but I know that perhaps regionally, there could be some countries like Mexico, for example, that could assist the rest of Latin America, and the same could happen in Africa.
I encourage buyers to remain patient
and I don't think it's impossible for that to occur and bring assistance to the rest of the world.
Yeah, on the subject of why there aren't more members, let's remember that last week, all of our offices were busy trying to make selections for community-funded projects on the one hand, and other infrastructure requests as well, having to do with the transportation bills that we will be acting upon. To the second part of the question about other countries, it's unconscionable that we continue to witness the death of hundreds and thousands of people per minute and not attempt to do something. Instead of the big pharma asking and questioning whether there is capacity or not in certain countries, I think they ought to be leading by showing how that capacity can grow and be advanced so that we can get the vaccine to all the people who need it.
Thank you. Who's next?
Eric Martin from Bloomberg.
Thank you, Eric. Go right ahead.
Eric, you're muted. Okay, Eric, if you're not there, we'll go with Steve Overly from Politico.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. I wanted to ask, one of the arguments against the waiver, particularly from your Republican colleagues, is that the underlying technology behind the vaccines could wind up going to China or Russia or another sort of US adversary. I wonder kind of how you respond to that criticism of the waiver.
Well, I think that we don't want this technology to go to China or to Russia, but I think there are ways to safeguard the technology. We're not suggesting that it be licensed to every manufacturer in the world. I think, as Earl explained, there are ways to design this waiver to protect any legitimate interest that vaccine manufacturers have. And I suggest we proceed to do that we honor legitimate concerns about protecting the recipe. Clearly, Pfizer wasn't concerned about that and didn't block its licensing to Sanofi for those 125 million doses. I believe there is a way to do the same thing without turning over any intellectual property to the Russians or the Chinese. Chuy, do you or Adriano, or I don't know who else is on at this point, want to add anything on that question? Please feel free to jump in at any point. If not, who's next?
Eric, are you there? Do you want to try again? Eric with Bloomberg. We can barely hear you, yes.
Okay, sorry, I'll try to talk louder. I'm not sure what the audio issue is. I just wanted to ask about tomorrow's WTO General Council meeting and what the expectation is. If tomorrow is an action forcing event, do you have any indication that there will be a change in the U.S. position tomorrow, or is this something you're looking for, movement over a longer period of time?
I don't know if Earl is still on or not. Are you, Earl?
Mr. Doggett, it's just you and Mr. Garcia now.
Okay, then I'll add that we are very hopeful there will be an announcement tomorrow. Earl has had, I believe, the most recent contact as our trade subcommittee chair. If there is not action tomorrow, then the call that Rosa made, that we made in our joint statement last week, is that we need more advocates from the faith community, from public advocacy groups, from businesses, to speak out about the importance of this. I have a great deal of confidence in Ambassador Tai. I hope that she will be able to act tomorrow. I believe she wants to do the right thing on this. We need to continue providing her the public support necessary to get there if it's not tomorrow. Who's next?
Sorry, Tammy from All Africa. Can you unmute?
Sure.
Would one of you please comment on the significance of the NIH developed technology that is a critical element of the mRNA vaccines, which represents a taxpayer investment beyond the direct US funding of the pharmaceutical companies to develop the vaccines?
We wouldn't have these vaccines today or the limited number of therapeutics for COVID-19 were it not for taxpayer investment in so many different ways. I actually have separate legislation called the TRAC Act that is designed to get into one database the many different ways through the Defense Department, NIH, colleges and universities, the many ways that the public subsidizes the pharmaceutical industry. And in the case of vaccines, it's in billions of dollars. So I think we have a stake in what use is made of our investment. We are the angel investors, and we need to continue asserting that interest on this TRIPS waiver. Chuy, do you have anything else on that?
No, we cannot ignore the fact that the request to the WTO has come directly from the countries which are becoming more desperate day by day, whether it's India, South Africa, or Mexico. And our conscience should be guiding us in efforts to protect, of course, the technology, but also to respond to this humanitarian crisis.
Thanks. Who's next?
All right, it looks like our last question is from Aaron Durkin from National Journal.
Great. Aaron?
Hi, thank you for holding this. I just wanted to ask you a question about supply chains. Argument I have also heard from industry is there's a concern that if this were to open up, there will be a run on supplies. I know the mRNA vaccines use certain raw materials. Then, of course, there's vials and needles and things like that. Is that something that you all are considering? And, if President Biden were to support the waiver, should it be, coupled with other actions to ensure, supply chains can support this?
Well, I think it is appropriate to consider supply chain issues. Again, I think as the waiver would be approved, there are ways to deal with this issue. The demand is so great out there that not only do we need more vaccine, we need more of all of the aspects of the supply chain you just referenced in order to get it to everyone. But it is not a legitimate reason to continue to block this waiver as the United States and the United Kingdom have done under the Trump administration, to simply say there are too many people that need it, we'll keep it all for ourselves. It is, as we said from the outset, our strong belief that we have a stake in this and that we cannot be an island from the rest of the world. What happens there, the variants that develop impact us. And so whether it is getting available more vials, more needles, as will probably be required, along with more vaccine, let's pitch in and make it an international effort to solve this international problem. Chuy, do you want to add anything else or shall we close?
Public health is a public good, and we can work the details out once we make a commitment to address the problem.
Thank you very much. Thanks to each of the reporters who have hung in with us. Let's hope we have real good news to report tomorrow. And if not, we plan to stay on it. Thank you very much.
Thanks.